And that might be my Facebook page that is in the background, which I don't want that to happen. And I'm going to share my desktop right now and begin the show. So welcome everyone to Actionable Innovations. My name is Lucy Gray. I'm the co-founder of this PLC along with Don Buckley. And we have been inviting people in to be part of our Friday afternoon conversations around innovation. And one of the things that I love to do is to bring in people who have been really influential in my career and have been part of my network for a while and share it with everybody else. And Don has also invited people in from his network and that sort of thing. And I need to move my controls down. Thank you, Bill. So now you can see our Applebee's logo here. And so anyway, so we've been inviting in friends who have something to share around educational technology, innovation, and everything associated with that. And today I'm really excited to bring to you Manish and Ketan Kothari, who I will tell you a little bit more in a minute. But to tell you a little bit more about Actionable Innovations, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to build an inclusive professional learning community for anyone interested in educational innovation. We host these conversations. We write about educational innovations on Medium. We support education leaders in this pandemic world. And we also are going to start offering comprehensive consulting services down the road. So that's what we're trying to do. People are looking to reconnect in this age of coronavirus, and we've been trying to provide a space for that. And we have all sorts of people who are involved. We have an architect, we have a medical doctor who's now an entrepreneur, we have teachers, we have school administrators. It's anybody who's interested in being part of this community is welcome to join us. So you can follow us on different social media. If you go to linktree/actionable.no, you will find all of our different channels. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube this weekend, along with a transcript and resources and that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. If you want to be part of our community and join and get further involved, we have a Slack community that you can join and that sort of thing, and you can contribute to our Medium publication, which is called Inspiring Actionable Innovations. You can just send me an email and I can send you more information about that if you want to be part of it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Ketan and Manish Kothari, who are brothers and entrepreneurs based in Silicon Valley. I was first introduced to them, I think, by people at COSIN. Irene Spiro, I believe, introduced me to them. And this is so long ago, maybe almost 10 years ago, I'm thinking. I went out to Palo Alto and was going to meet with them. And they said, Crystal from Edmodo is going to join us for lunch. And Crystal was the CEO of Edmodo at the time. And I was like, really, that's interesting. And lo and behold, their startup at the time was being acquired by Edmodo. So it was quite exciting. And I went on to work with them doing some social media work for Edmodo for a little while. And it's been really exciting to see and learn from them over the years. They are two of the most professionally generous people I know. They always make time for anyone like me. And they are the quintessential networkers. So there's a lot to learn from them from the business side of ed tech. And I think it's really important to have conversations between educators and the ed tech business people so that we understand each other and learn from each other. So I'm thrilled to have them here. Welcome, Manish and Ketan.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm going to turn this over to Don for a second, and then we'll get into a conversation about your background and how you got where you have landed. Don, do you want to take it over and tell us a little bit about your famous questionnaire?
Sure. Yeah. So welcome, Manish and Ketan, and welcome everyone else. And thanks in advance for spending the end of your work or non-work week with us. Hopefully you'll leave with some inspiration, which is a big part of what we're trying to do. But I'm going to start it off with something called the Prost Questionnaire. And if you're a Vanity Fair reader and you'll skip right to the last page in interview, there's always a a questionnaire called the Prost Questionnaire and they interview usually celebrities. But I've sort of taken a spin on that and adapted it out of the celebrity mode. But the history of the Proust Questionnaire is that it's a set of questions that was answered by the French philosopher writer Marcel Proust and sometimes used by interviewers today. Proust answered the questions in a sort of form of confession book / album, a form of sort of parlor, like a parlor game popular in Victorian times. So that's the sort of history. So again, there's no wrong and right answers. It's just as an icebreaker to get us going. So I'll to get us along going, I'll start with Manish. And here's my first question for you is, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
My idea of perfect happiness. First of all, let me thank you for both of you for hosting us and having us. Thank you so much. We'll talk about the other things that you have. But my idea of perfect happiness is just a walk in the woods or a walk in the mountains or a hike by the ocean. And that's what I would say.
Great. Awesome. And Ketan, same one for you.
Okay. And now I'm on the spot here. I have to answer the same question?
Yes, same question.
Oh, idea for the perfect happiness. Okay.
Yeah.
A wonderful meal, would be just absolutely fantastic.
So what's your favorite food, Ketan?
Oh, I have lots of food, except it has to be vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian. So as long as it's vegetarian, I just love all kinds of food. Still discovering new stuff, which is unbelievable.
I'm a vegetarian as well, and I will recommend one chef for you, Otto Lengi. He's an Israeli chef and makes incredible vegetarian food. So
and where is he based?
London.
Yeah. I've heard of him, and he's fabulous.
Yeah.
It's
amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be very complex recipes with up to 25 ingredients, but totally worth it. Anyway, let's not sidetrack. Well, I'm not freaked out with 25 ingredients because I'm an ex-chemist. I studied chemistry, so I sort of understand how all this works. But anyway, let's not drag. Next question. What do you consider the most overrated virtue? And we'll go to Manish for that one.
For me, I feel the word passion, especially as it applies to younger children who are supposed to be passionate about things when they graduate from high school. I think it's quite overrated because I really feel that they can't know some, maybe a few really do have a passion and truly pursue that for their lifetimes. But most are now told that you have to have a passion about something in order to get to this kind of college. And I think it's a little bit ridiculous.
I totally agree. I think we have to shift the word passion to the word purpose, and then you can move with that, because I'm with you. I think there is a statistic, like it's only 1% of people on the planet have exact passions like that. It's very, very small. So it's a big ask, I agree. So same question for you, Ketan. What do you think is the most overrated virtue?
That's a tough one. Maybe I would just say that this whole concept of having lots of pedigree degrees, at least in Silicon Valley, that's a big deal. So I feel that innovation doesn't have to happen with the number of degrees you have, but rather the kind of background and the purpose that you're talking about is behind what you want to do.
Right. And so audience, feel free to write your answers if you want. I see Lucy's firing some in there, but take the Prost Questionnaire with us. So we'll do one final question, guys, and I am gonna pick. Yes. What talent would you most like to have? Manish, you're up first.
Oh my God. I would like to have sort of awareness with balance. Is really not a talent, but it's something that I would aspire to have a state of mind, I guess, awareness with balance.
Okay, cool. And Ketan?
I would just I want to constantly keep learning. And so right now it's music, but next year it may be something else. But but I guess fundamentally, I don't want to stop learning. And it's getting harder as you get older, but I still want to continue to do that.
Wow. Okay. Great. Great. Hey, Lee, I totally agree with you. As a dyslexic person, perfection is way overrated. I totally agree with you. It's like put it out there, and publish first, edit later is my motto.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so that's our little sort of icebreaker, and hopefully that's put us all in a good place, and we're ready to roll. I don't know how you guys want to work your prez. Manish and Ketan, who goes first or whatever, but that's up to you guys entirely. So I'm passing it over to you.
I think Ketan is going to start with the introduction of our journey, and we'll start with that, and then we'll open up. You guys can ask questions anytime. But I love this icebreaker. We actually might use it. I didn't know about this Prost questionnaire, but I love it, and so we might use it. Thank you for the idea.
I think that means that you don't read publications like Vanity Fair, which actually might be a good thing. I don't know, but
Lucy,
thank you so much.
About me?
No, in fact, I want to read it now. I want to read it because of
it's definitely unique. This is the first time we've ever started a panel discussion with an icebreaker like the Proust questionnaire, which is kind of really cool. Thank you, Don.
I think you'll enjoy it.
We're going to dive right into our journey. So as you know, we are brothers. We both came here to go to university. Both of us got undergraduate in electrical engineering, and then we went on to do other things. But one of the things that happened to me is I got recruited by Apple Computer, which is perhaps the best thing that happened at the time when Apple was really small. It is just, as now there's so many books and movies about it, very entrepreneurial, full of very crazy, brilliant people. And I learned a lot about basically entrepreneurship and starting companies, just being there, imbibed in that culture. And so that, of course, led to the fact that we started our first company. That was almost, but it was 1992. So I don't know many years ago. And there wasn't even a term EdTech. And we were just trying to create a product that school kids could benefit from in terms of learning computer, keyboard skills, as well as taking notes. Our first product was a hardware product called AlphaSmart. And AlphaSmart basically had a full-size keyboard, a little display, ran on 3 AA batteries, and was designed grounds up to be, at the child's desk. So very rugged. I found the other co-founder. So it was Manish, myself, and there was a third co-founder, another engineer from Apple, Joe Barris. The three of us that started the company. Joe, used to be very well known to drop kick those AlphaSmarts, a few 50 feet every now and then at trade shows. But, with that product came a lot of what we learned on the road, which is kind of crazy. All three of us were basically engineers, and we had, some business school experience. But we built an entire business selling to schools, and our primary users being school teachers and school kids. And all that stuff we learned pretty much on the job, so to speak. What was amazing is that educators are extremely good about giving you feedback. The real good thing you need to do, the most important, simple thing you need to do is listen to what they're saying and try and, make that happen. And that was our basic motto with AlphaSmart, and has been our motto for all the other 2 education technology companies that we started after that. But essentially the journey the first company was more a Silicon Valley garage startup. We put in all our savings. We grew it organically, but we had the fortunate ability to take that public on the NASDAQ 14 years later. And then we got acquired by another, at that time, public company called Renaissance Learning. And, it was just an amazing, amazing ride. And as I said, we learned a lot. The second company, Aspen Learning, didn't do quite as well. Our goal was to actually create a grounds up LMS for K through 12. And we started shipping a month before the Lehman Brothers crash. As some of you may be aware, that impacted school budgets significantly because tied to the property taxes. And we were not able to really take that company beyond a certain number of students. I think we got about 10,000 students on it, and then we plateaued. Um, we ended up selling some of the assets to Pearson, and it was right around the time when we were struggling, trying to figure out. We kind of bumped into a couple of ex-Googlers who were trying to do a machine learning based startup called Root One. We were just blown away with what they were doing technically. We told them all the risks, and we told them, look, what just happened to our last company. It's very risky, but they were super excited, passionate, wanted to do this. So the four of us started Root One, and very soon after starting it, we actually got acquired by another startup called Edmodo, and we joined forces to have another amazing social network journey, which I think right now it's over 250 million now teachers and students on it. When we joined, it was about 19 million. So we oversaw a huge growth in terms of users on that network. And I think that's really a quick, like 5-10 minute overview of our 25 years. Manish, I don't know if you want to add anything more.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a few things because there's been 4 companies, not all have been successful, but couple of things to just point out. As Ketan said, or emphasize, I should say, we have not been teachers, we're not teachers or educators. And what we learned about making our products better had to do a lot with feedback from people who are in the classroom or in schools and districts. So one is we really started off, we didn't even go to grade school. In the case of Ketan and myself, we did not go to grade school here in the US. So that's a lot of, it's a lot of credit to folks like yourselves who helped us not only with the original ideas, but to continually improve our products. And we can talk a little bit more about the challenges of doing that from the business side. And as we see it, a disconnect. So one thing I want to point out is just we're non-educators, didn't know anything about, and yet we're able to fortunately do things like this. So feedback and that rapport is extremely important. The second is that somehow over the 25 plus years, we stayed in K-12 education and education technology before it was already a big thing, before it was considered really exciting. And the reason is the impact is something that we really cared about and saw the benefits of. And I'm looking at some of the chats, and it's really endearing and heartening to know that many of you either used AlphaSmarts or knew about it and about Edmodo. So that usage mattered to us a lot, which is what kept us going in these endeavors, even though some of them were very challenging to scale. So I'll stop out there in terms of the intro, and we can go into any questions.
So this is fascinating to me. So you really have a unique perspective, probably than some of the I would say, you guys are about my age, so maybe the younger entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who maybe have just started in the ed tech space and are coming from a business background. You've seen how this has completely evolved from being not a device in every classroom or in the hands of every kid to now that's almost kind of expected or hoped for. And I guess for me, this what are the lessons learned? Was there anybody that helped you along as a mentor in this space from the business perspective or from the education perspective? If you started in a garage with your own savings, I'm sure there was somebody that was kind of giving you some guidance. Who was that? And do you also think that your proximity to Silicon Valley also helped with that too, because you were kind of embedded in that culture?
I'll just take a couple of stabs at this, and then Ketan, you can continue. So first of all, Lucy, you're right. When Ketan and Joe and I, back in the early 90s, that ratio was about 15 students to each computer, typically in a lab. And that changed by I would say, late 90s to more like 10 to 1. And finally, when the AlphaSmart was sunsetted in 2013, this is post Renaissance's acquisition, and this is pre-Chromebook, it had already come down to 4-1 or 3-1. So, that progressively changed. And now we all talk about 1-1 ubiquity, not only in the US, but elsewhere. With regards to your question, we had both business mentors and education mentors. Let me talk about the education mentors first, because we really needed those since we had no exposure to the whole educational aspect of things. So even when Ketan and Joe got this idea for the AlphaSmart, it came from a group of educators. So from the genesis of the idea for AlphaSmart, and they did a phenomenal job at prototyping it and going back and forth with the educators to finally get to what would be our first version. So I think they really did spend a lot of time getting feedback from the right people to get product market fit. Later in the journey of AlphaSmart, we added consciously added an educational advisory board. So these are not business people; these are not board members that you have typically on a company, but people who served as classroom teachers, even students who used our product, to tech directors, all the way to assistant superintendents, a range of the entire sort of group of stakeholders from that side, advising us with 2 formal meetings we would have literally like a couple of days twice a year, typically in the summer and then sometime in February. I remember it was always around Super Bowl, and someone would always complain about the game going on and that home team playing. That's why it's so vividly baked. So the Educational Advisory Board was very, very helpful throughout not just AlphaSmart's career, but we also had that at Edmodo and at Route One. And Ketan, do you want to add to that and talk about also the business advisors?
Correct, correct. So on the other side, as Manish said, clearly, I mean, pretty much the first meeting that we had was with educators, because the origin of the idea of AlphaSmart was a group of teachers out of the Pacific Northwest actually discussing a product that they really wanted on a threaded discussion board. So this is Unix internet, right? This is before the World Wide Web. This is before the browser. So there were already teachers, probably very geeky teachers, talking about it. We just happened to be see this discussion going on. Joe and I knew we could build it. But from that point on, a lot of our other mentors, whether they were business or actually helping us on the technical side, bizarrely enough, came from our Apple community, which was just, these are the people we worked with, we knew. So I'll give you one example. We needed to design the industrial plastics for this. And neither Joe and I are both electrical engineers. We knew how to design the logic board and all the rest of it, but we needed help there. And actually, it was just a couple of the Apple designers who said, oh yeah, this is something I can do on a Saturday for you. And they would just whip up the design. It was simple designs, but spec to what we wanted. We wanted to be rugged, so we wanted the plastic to be thicker than normal, things like that. And so, we got mentors like that helping us throughout our journey, as well as the business side of Apple. We had a bunch of friends who, and this is where Silicon Valley is so amazing, is that even though you're working in the company, they're actually advising you on all the things that we should do right and the mistakes we should avoid on both the business side and the product side and the engineering side throughout this journey, which was just absolutely fantastic. So, and then the second and the third time onwards, we had even, by then we had board members, we had VC investors. So we got so much more help for taking the company public, which was another big, huge leap for us. We didn't know what it takes to take a company public. So all of this, of course, all around just in the Silicon Valley itself, is just tremendous in terms of what we can
I wanted to add one story, Lucy and Don, the audience, where the Educational Advisory Board was very instrumental in changing a feature for the AlphaSmart. When Ketan and Joe first designed the AlphaSmart, each one had a little adapter plug into the wall. Until they sent it to the educators, they go like, we can't accommodate that, like 30 AlphaSmarts charging in one classroom. And little did we realize that it's not like working at an Apple or where you can actually have enough outlets, a simple thing like that. And that's what prompted Joe to change the design and make the battery life worth like a school year, so that teachers just wouldn't have to worry on just 2 AA battery would last so long. So that's a small example that took us a long way. A second thing on the business side, Lucy, that at least one of the takeaways for me is that we all have board members, and some of them here in Silicon Valley at our companies are extremely well connected investors. And many of them, not all of them, many of them can be super helpful during the stages of going public or with certain connections. But some of our business mentors that I appreciated the most is folks who went through some of the challenges, literally business challenges, just as we did, like the operational business challenge. You miss a quarter in sales, or your product is delayed, or you cannot hire people just because Google and Facebook can. So that sort of advice from people was really what we appreciated from mentors on the business side, not necessarily only board members.
Your story makes me think of Don's teaching partner. Don teaches at Columbia University at Teachers College with Rashawn Richards. And I don't know if you've met Rashawn, but he's an Apple Distinguished Educator with me. And he invented Explain Everything. But the story behind that, I wish he had come to us. I invited him, but he's probably busy. He had the idea about a whiteboard that you could draw on an iPad, I guess, and he blogged about it. And some developers in Eastern Europe said, "Hey, we could do that for you." And so that's how they joined forces, right, Don? Is that how it started?
Yeah.
Have you guys met Rashawn?
No, we've heard of him. I've heard of him, but we've never met him. We don't know him.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to introduce you.
Yeah. He just moved back to be CEO of the company. He left it for a while. He was chief academic officer. He went back into the classroom again. And now he's back out again. So he moves in and out of the classroom all the time, which is a great experience. But Ketan, I want to go back to something you were saying about the outlets. That problem still hasn't been solved in schools, just so you know. So it's
yes,
a problem.
Yes, it's amazing. That we literally went into the classroom, and now every time I keep counting how many outlets are there in the classroom, and I think the maximum I've seen is like 5 or 6 even today. It's never more than that.
Yeah,
well, some schools have the cords that you can pull down now. That's the new thing.
That's the best solution. The cords from above and down.
Yes.
But it's.
Hey, Nona has a question. Nona, do you want to ask it, or you want to grab the mic and chat, or would you just like me to ask it? Or
I'm happy to jump in. And thank you, Lucy. This is great, actually. It's so great and heartwarming to see two guys who are going through this, have gone through it 3 different times. So we have a new startup. I've been working in the industry for 30 years, consulting with large school districts on how to implement technology. And finally, we've come up with our own product based on that experience that's focusing on real-time learner engagement analytics and translating student voice into professional learning. And it's everything you're saying it's just so nice to speak to someone who's been through, like you said, been through this journey. And I was just curious, based on, you said your first company, 2 of your companies have been enormously successful. And the second one you said plateaued at 10,000 students. What was different about that company? If you go back and make a different decision, what would it be?
Yeah, I think personally, it's a great question. Personally, I think there is quite a bit of serendipity in these things. It's not all what you do, or, I do believe really after seeing it 4 times in 4 different, but there were some specific things this is in the case of Aspen Learning. That was the second company. So we basically made a simplified LMS in a box. So we took Moodle and we made it simpler, because Moodle was designed as an LMS for higher education, for colleges and universities, and made it simpler so it would work more appropriately with, say, at least high schoolers and middle schoolers. And the idea was low-cost computing was becoming real, so LMSs would become sort of more ubiquitous. That was the premise. And I think we designed it well, but at the same time, ironically, and this is the serendipity part, things like Edmodo and Schoology were becoming available, and Edmodo was free. So our product was actually difficult to compete against free. And very, very strangely, we got acquired by Edmodo and ended up leading Edmodo. So, that's why I talk about serendipity. At least that's one way I would sort of the lens through which I look. Ketan, anything to add to why Aspen Learning was perhaps not as successful?
Yeah, I give a very simplistic answer, Nona, about the whole financial crash, but it's almost always a little bit more, involved in terms of why things succeed and all. But I would say perhaps the hardest thing there was as entrepreneurs, that was the first time we were failing. And when it's your baby, you kind of, one of the biggest mistakes you make is you try to make it work a lot longer than you should. And so the advice I would give is always, again, this is coming back to a good set of mentors, advisors, is to have a bouncing board where somebody is going to be willing to tell you, wait a minute, just look at this. It's not working. And tell you, I mean, either you kind of try to change and pivot, which is a new term that now is being used a lot in Silicon Valley, and see if something else makes it become, better. But by and large, often this combination of what's going around in the market, is there something that's almost as good, that's free compared to what you're charging for? What's happening there that's going to make it very difficult to operate,
And
And
Lucy,
so that's
yeah, I'm sorry, Lucy, this is one of the big lessons learned for us, that knowing when to stop. I think William, someone mentioned it in the chat as well. I think it's one of the hardest things, as Ketan said, to know as an entrepreneur, when you say that you spent enough or invested enough, because sometimes it goes the other way. You take a little longer, and we've seen it, the businesses succeed as well. So it's not like there's a clear answer.
Well, this is so
and
helpful.
a great example of that is Zoom. We were very early users of Zoom at Edmodo, and we would worry that they're about to go under. We'll never be able to. Should we be locking on a platform that's always running out of money? And the next thing happens is COVID, and this just completely transformed and take Zoom in a different direction, right?
So two things.
Those are extreme examples.
Was Aspen the one? I think our client, I think Greenwich Public Schools bought Aspen. I think it was a really good product. I think it's a student information system, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, we bought. We
a little.
We liked it.
We
that
had
was a good product. But the question now with COVID is, a lot of teachers are saying they don't want to try one more new thing, right? There's a time right now when I think this is a very hard time to be an ed tech entrepreneur, given that people are feeling very overwhelmed. People are leaving the classroom. Principals want to retain teachers, so they don't want to have a teacher tell a teacher, we want you to learn one more app or one more thing. So what would be your advice to those of us, like, in this market now?
So it's interesting. Our perspective now over 30 years is that this market always favors incumbents. Those who are in there and embedded, there's so much inertia to get in and break that mold, even with a hardware product in the early 90s. But more recently, to your point, it's become more challenging because there's been such a plethora of products, especially software, which is easier to get people, to try out, that we know, as you know, many startups who all say you must try it out for free. I think in our experience, and this is going back to folks like Lucy and many others, those who really do care, teachers who care or educators who care about products and are willing to spend time, not just say, I'll try out the new thing and then I'm done in 4 weeks, I'm going to try out another thing, but to actually go through at least a cycle. And usually that means a school year, maybe at least one term with that product. It's not easy, but we've always found people, if you're building something that really is based on educator feedback or some need, you'll find at least a small group to start off with, and then that builds from there. Ketan, how that?
No, I think that's good. That's good. Yeah.
One of the best things that I thought that came along was our friend Betsy Corcoran, our mutual friend Betsy, had these summits through EdSurge where startups, fledgling startups could present their product. Teachers could actually give them feedback during the event. There was usually kind of a keynote speaker and giveaways and that sort of thing. It was like a half-day event. I helped with one of them. It was such a great concept to get teachers right then and there giving you the feedback that you needed and get eyeballs, on the product, so that maybe the influential teachers in the room would spread the word. And they never found a model, really. It was my understanding, really, to make that work. And I don't know why. I thought maybe it was just a lot of heavy lifting to make that happen in different parts of the country. But I thought that kind of feedback was great.
So the feedback is in fact very useful. Part of the challenge, and I wanted to bring this up to the audience to see how perhaps what ideas you may have as educators, is that as companies or corporations, that feedback cycle is much shorter than what it might be from the perspective of educators. So as an example, investors who invest in your business typically want to show or have some sort of data on efficacy or improvement in a short period of time, maybe a month or 2 months, whereas most people on the educator side will take longer than that to give you the feedback. So one disconnect I feel that there is in this cycle of getting very useful feedback is the timelines are very different. And there isn't a clear or simple answer to that. I think that's one challenge that we all face, is that we want all this feedback. You guys have very good feedback to share and give, but we're operating on different timelines.
That's so insightful, because I think that's a disconnect that could be fixed somehow. I mean, like, I think if people's like manage their expectations a little bit, maybe that would help a little bit. We have a member of our group.
May I make a comment on that?
Hang on a sec. Let me finish my thought here. We have a member of the group who used to work in an ed tech startup. She's a brilliant woman, friend of Don's, and I won't mention the name of the company that she worked for, but she found it really distressing when it was a literacy product and their research was showing that it was not effective. And so she's an educator by trade, and she said, we need to redesign, we need to go in and look at it a little bit more and see what we need to do to make it more effective. And the response from the company was, well, we're more concerned about our investors and what their response is and that sort of thing. And they weren't, and I don't think that's the norm in a lot of these ed tech companies. I think a lot of ed tech companies do want to do right by providing a quality product. But in her experience, it was really a turnoff to her. And so how do you see that being a common thing where the bottom line is more important than the actual quality of the product or the efficacy of it? Have you seen that to be an issue at all?
I think it depends on the stage of the company. More mature companies that already have some sort of cash flow or are more stable, generally not, Lucy, because they have the luxury to say, we can sort of, get this feedback, but yet there's something paying for everything else, all the expenses. But if you're an early stage company and the lights might actually get shut off, if you don't, you may not get your next funding round, it is very much a real pressure. And the second thing I'll say that is a very hard thing for people, for businesses to do, is prove efficacy. Because it depends, you try to do, even some folks are now trying these randomized controlled trials in classrooms. I'm a little skeptical of that because the data is that there's so many variables for a child in a classroom. And what we do know is good teachers matter a lot. So even though we are tech lovers, tech, whatever, evangelists, I think we overestimate what technology can do in terms of effecting or helping outcomes, good outcomes.
It's not the silver bullet that we think it's going to be. Lee, did you have a question? And Ketan has to leave fairly soon, so I want to make sure that Ketan can get your question, Lee.
I just wanted to say something about, you were talking about feedback from educators. I think if you're dealing with K-8 educators, they're pretty overwhelmed just with all the work that needs to get done and things like that. So I guess as far as getting the feedback, make sure that it's easy. Maybe there's some sort of incentive that they would get it back. And I think giving them attribution so that there's, because as teachers, we're not in it for the money, but it's nice to be acknowledged.
Yep. And all that is very, those are all very good points. We would make sure, for example, that for the really important feedback, we would actually have a separate little, luncheon or a dinner event, and so they were not, so they were out of their day-to-day headaches, right? So from that onwards, giving them credit, making sure that all of that stuff mattered a lot. We gave them stock in the company. All our key advisors always got some equity. Yeah, so it was all of that. And some of them didn't get it because of conflict, but we would try to figure out how to get them do it some other way. But yeah.
And I do want to thank you for the AlphaSmart. We used it. It was terrific. And I think it really showed its durability when a student dropped it down 2 flights of stairs and it still worked.
Yeah.
That's thanks to Joe and our engineers. They did a phenomenal job. Thank you, though.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Amy has a comment. How can you or we get feedback that is forward thinking rather than now thinking? And when would you rather reinvent the widget versus make it incrementally better? That's a really good question. I don't know. I think that's $1 million question here, Amy. And I don't know if we're going to have the answer in this today, but I would be interested in the last few minutes if any educators or anyone here wants to talk a little bit about what do educators need in terms of ed tech right now.
I have one, Lucy,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just have one quick comment for Amy's question, just to perhaps help frame it, and then I don't want to spend too much time. But one way to think about it is how we internally at the corporate side think about innovation versus incremental growth. And usually, it's not uncommon that you spend, like, say, some large chunk, 60, 70% of your resources on incremental growth. So this is stuff that keeps paying the bills and all, and about 20 to 30% on innovation. These are what we would say are, whether you want to call them moonshots or experimental things that you expect that 9 out of 10 will fail, but therefore you spend only a certain amount of resources. So in terms of the feedback for the forward thinking versus the now thinking also, that ratio, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'm just talking about how we think about forward versus current in terms of innovation at a company level.
And can I add to that, Lucy, as well? Amy, I use a reflection methodology, which I think will address what you're asking about. It's I like, I wish, what if. And the what if portion will push it into the forward thinking way, because it can blow the whole idea up, or it can force you to think, oh my God, and it works. And I think that balance will get, the what if will get the move forward for you.
That's great. Amy, do you want to add anything more to that, or?
No, I appreciate you taking the time to answer. I think it's one of those things when we're designing schools and designing classrooms, adding more outlets, for example, is a great suggestion. However, what if we turn the whole thing on its head and talked about using space and equipment and devices in a different way that, so I think, it's about sort of changing the question, and most educators just say, yeah, give me more outlets, which is a good suggestion. I'm not belittling that suggestion, but I think the question gets farther and deeper. So thanks for the insights.
No, Amy, you're 100% right. You get what I call the 1.0 answers all the time. More outlets, as opposed to, well, what if we didn't need outlets, or just framing it like that, and it shifts it into a whole other plane. But that's the 1%,
So piggybacking on that, so in terms of, I feel like there's a lot of 1.0 thinking about what teachers need. Like, we're thinking that we need more kinds of products that are more of the same, that are not necessarily leading to products that I find exciting. Like, I want to see kids produce and publish and have autonomy, and so products that allow for that kind of thing get me excited, me personally. And I'm just one person out of 5 million educators out there. For example, in one project that's the last couple of years that's really excited me, I keep on thinking about how 10, 15, 20 years ago we were talking about 21st century skills and how kids needed to learn all these soft skills, and those kids that we were teaching back then are now grown up. Like, I'm aging myself. So the example I think of is Joseph Gordon-Levitt, the actor. He's married to an engineer, I think a Silicon Valley engineer person. And he has this community called Hit Record, where people from all over the world contribute photography and writing and music and build artworks together. And it's been going for like 10 years. So it's actually been around for a while. And it's just an amazing creative community. And it's teaching people to work across borders using skills. And so he's got this kind of entrepreneurial mindset. He's not just an actor, he's also a technology person. Or Hank and John Green, the young author who wrote Fault in Our Stars, and his brother who started VidCon, and they vlog together and do all these kinds of, they do Crash Course, for instance, if you've ever seen that channel. Those younger people are are kind of entrepreneurial in their spirit, and that's what we want. I want kids to be able to grow up thinking, I can do that. I'm not going to be pigeonholed by whatever job I have. I can do lots of different things with the talents and interests, passions that I have. And so I get interested about products that will lead to something like that, as opposed to something that's just going to reinforce learning as it is. So that's my soapbox. But I'm wondering, is anybody else out there curious about, like, or what do you think teachers need? Does anybody have an idea of what you think teachers need going, especially going forward into the pandemic? I'd be curious.
I don't know if it's what they need more than this, Lucy. I feel you have to have a product that fits into your day-to-day, something that's already in use and not an add-on. And that's what I try and do all the time. I let the audience choose the documentation tool, and I adapt to that. And so, you know, that, because if it's part of your day-to-day, it's natural. There's, you know, it's part of your habit. You know, I talk about designing habits. And that to me is crucial, and that's when it gets done. That can mean a lot of different communication tools, but, you know, to me, it's, I'm not too concerned about that. People using all different communication tools. Is the one that suits the user. And with my university students and their graduate students, you know, they leave a digital footprint after the 15 weeks they spend with me, and I tell them choose their medium. You know, choose the one that works for you, because that's where you get the most out of it.
And yeah, you know, there was another question earlier about, like, if it's a widget, how do you decide what widget? Some of the other things to think about, adding to what Don just said, is essentially, you know, when you're designing, especially if you're going to design a widget, you must make sure that the outcome is significantly orders of magnitude more, whether it's cheaper or it's going to do more, or it's going to compared to what the existing solution is doing, right? So that's also super important. Along the way, we've learned that if you just make it just incremental, often it's not good enough, right? Because somebody may just say, I don't want the headaches of learning this new thing. I'm fine with what I have. But if the value proposition is significantly higher in terms of what it's providing, again, 2, 3x, maybe even 10x, you know, so if you want to really challenge yourself, you know, you start off with a 10x goal, and then maybe you only get to 3 or 4 or 5x, you know, and that would be good enough. But at least in Silicon Valley here, those are the kind of rule of thumbs that we're using when we're trying to figure out a disruptive widget, you know, something that's going to kind of really go in and disrupt what is existing today.
Ketan, I know you have to go to another meeting, so I don't want to keep you, but thank you so much for this. And I'll ask Manish this, and you can fill in later. What's next for you guys? What are you doing now?
Share with everybody our contact details, so that, you know, even if, again, later, if there are more specific questions, we'd be happy to answer them. We always encourage entrepreneurs. So thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, I've got to go. But I'm actually going to an advisory board meeting, believe it or not. So
that'll lead to Lucy's question. See you, Ketan. Thanks. So I did want to say, I'm not an educator, but on my wish list for a long time, we have had, including Ketan, Vibhu as well, our co-founder from Route 1, somehow having, rather than testing kids all the time, and I'm not saying this takes away the need for tests or what we call explicit assessments, but a way to test folks or evaluate students on an implicit basis by virtue of what they do, whether it's their writings, what they publish, the music they create, the artwork they create. And a good proxy for that, where I think it has worked from the industry, is something called GitHub, which I don't know if you're aware of. This is where software developers, programmers check in their code, and that software code can be actually commented by others, improved upon, there's attribution, and then can be published in different ways. And the reason GitHub, in my mind, is a good proxy is that by virtue of what you do. So today, employers and large companies like Google, Apple, Facebook often looked at what code programmers have checked into GitHub and how many times it's been commented on or reused to see whether they are good programmers rather than just saying, oh, you got an A in computer science 101 or whatever at Stanford. So I think this idea of moving away, at least a little bit away from explicit assessments or tests or quizzes to something that's more implicit is clearly on the top of my wish list in education.
Yeah, totally, Manish. That's like having an authentic audience for assessment as well. You know, bringing people from outside panel to give feedback. And yeah, our students use GitHub for that very reason you're saying. And it's often hard to shift the educator mindset into the commercial mindset. You know, that there's always a friction that you have to work with. But, you know, I'm all for putting it out in the real world for the feedback.
And this way, people feel like what they've done can also be evaluated. It's not just about how they test. And some people test well, others don't. And, you know, so, but going back to your question, Lucy, about what's next, Ketan sort of alluded to a little bit. He's going into an advisory board meeting. So partly because we have, our dad is actually almost 92 years old. He lives in India. Our mother passed away about 1.5 years ago. And the reason I'm telling you this is we're at a stage in our lives where we're not currently, at least, able to commit to a full-time sort of job, if you will. And as a result, we're trying to help entrepreneurs and startups, not just in education, but across. So we have about 5 different startups we are working with. Some are a little bit farther along. One of them actually got acquired just 3 months ago, was acquired by Course Hero. And it was a great company to at least advise and young founders. So it's engagements like that. And in addition to that, some volunteer work. So in my case, I'm just tutoring second graders or first graders through reading partners and delivering meals to the elderly. It's a range of stuff, but it certainly isn't full-time work is the way. And in the meantime, we hope we can help a few companies and founders at the earlier stages through the work that we're doing.
Okay, that sounds great. And it makes sense. Like, and especially now, I think things are just so weird with the pandemic, like making plans to do things like we did before is just, I think things are kind of on hold. Everybody's kind of taking real life into consideration and breathing a little bit. So I think that makes sense. 2 things that kind of stood out to me that might be of interest to you. I think we need to introduce you to Rashawn, because I think you would really like him. He's one of those entrepreneurs you might want to help.
Yep.
Then Chris Walsh, who worked with me on Google stuff, he's doing teacherpreneur stuff.
Yep, we remember Chris.
Yeah, he's doing some teacherpreneur stuff, and I haven't heard from him in a while, so I don't know what he's doing there right now, but he wants to bring teachers together to design things, which is interesting. And then the other thing that's been intriguing me lately too, that may be interesting to you all, is Neil D'Souza was a presenter he worked for Cisco, and he presented for the Global Ed Conference.
We know Neil very well. Yes.
Yeah, because Molly now from Edmodo now works for him.
Yep.
And if you, for the rest of you who aren't familiar with him, he has a startup built towards, I guess, our generation or older people to keep them learning and moving and growing. And I've been watching it on LinkedIn and some of the things that they're doing, and it seems like it's really thriving. And I think that's a really interesting segment.
You know, Vibhu is an advisor to Neil's company. So
okay.
we're not, but Vibhu is. Yeah. So we know them well.
Okay. So is there any other companies that we should keep an eye out before we wrap up? Any other companies? Course Hero is one that you mentioned. Anything else that any other companies we should look at is just out of interest that you like or you're involved with or have caught your eye?
So a couple of the companies are not even in education, so it may not be completely relevant for this audience. But I think in terms of education more broadly, rather than company specific, I look to what's happening in terms of consumerization of education technology and business models to Asia. I think companies that are coming out of India or China are, for whatever reason, farther along in the way their models are accepted by what I call the consumerization of edtech. So this is usually parents or children or students themselves paying for solutions rather than the burden of that falling on the school or the district. And in terms of trends in higher ed, in terms of disruptive models, I think there's some of the best disruptors are here in the US in the way that, taking chunks of education and making it into modular things. So you can take a 3-week or a 2-week module on data analysis or on something in business like finding product market fit. I think the US is leading on that. So rather than specific examples, more broadly, I would say look to the US for higher ed disruptive models, and to Asia, specifically India or China, for the consumerization more so at the K through 12 level.
Interesting. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how things shape up as we come out of the pandemic and everything. But this has been a fascinating hour, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So thank you, Manish and Ketan and Absentia, for coming. We really appreciate your time and expertise. And if you want to put your email in the chat
Yes.
or anything, I put your LinkedIn profiles as well.
Yes,
And
I'm going to do that right now. I'm putting both our emails so that and we'd love to hear from you if you have questions, if there's some connections we can help make, just help out in general.
Okay. And Don, do you have anything you want to wrap up with or anything?
No, but we'll let the room open for people to chat for the next 20, 25 minutes if they want.
Okay. Next week, we're going to talk with another entrepreneur. There's kind of an entrepreneur theme that's emerged from the people that we've asked to come on. And Alethea Master has a student app development nonprofit, and Julian Reed is going to interview her next week. And so she's kind of adding to our entrepreneurship series here that we didn't officially plan. But we're really excited about that. She's she's 2 weeks, sorry. Next week is Gary Steger. So Gary Steger is, if you're not familiar with Gary, incredibly provocative thought leader in education and ed tech. And he's come out with a book recently that's a kind of compilation of how different people have been using computers and that sort of thing. So he's going to tell us about that. He's going to tell us his thoughts about innovation, and it will not be dull. If you know Gary, it will not be dull. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to stop recording, and we'll see you next week.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to put in